So we're thrilled to present to your viewers, Gene, the new Model 30 and the new SACD30N. The Model 30 is an integrated stereo amplifier that Emmanuel's going to take us through all the nuts and bolts and the performance that he's built into this product. It's an amazing product, and it sets a new benchmark for us at this price point. The SACD30N, as he's going to talk about in a bit, is also an amazing new product. It's a hybrid SACD player and networked audio player combination piece. So this stack together is the Model 30 and SACD30N. And if you're paying attention, you see that we're going back to embracing the nomenclature model in our names. It's very clear that we have an opportunity to not just, again, represent our history in the products, but also represent it in things like the model name and how we actually lay out our assortment of products. So we're thrilled to present these products to our fans and viewers.
It's a very symmetric design. Was that done intentionally?
Well, that's a great segue.
Oh, sorry.
That's a great segue. That we're showing Phil's screen right now, and he's actually got the stack right there in his house. Phil, if you don't mind going back to the screen, I'd love to hand it over to Simon. I think we've talked a bit about the context around it, but you can actually go back a slide if you don't mind. Simon is our Vice President of Industrial Design. He spent a ton of energy on making sure all the nuts and bolts of these products and the way that they feel is exactly what we're looking to do. So I'd like to turn it over to him to actually take us through maybe a level deeper on the design around these products.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. You mentioned symmetry there, and that, like I said, that was a great segue. One of the things that we did, we can go to the next slide, Phil, that'd be great, thank you. One of the things that we did was sort of reach back, as Joel was saying, into the history of that and honor that sort of 70 years legacy of just phenomenal products and experiences, but also be honorific to that, but be thoroughly modern in our approach. We didn't just want to have a retrospective and reintroduce that. The Model 30 is representing a start of a whole new, what we'd call a design language. And if you look back at the history of our products, there are generations of what we call design languages, look and feels, but they all share common attributes. And one of those was symmetry. And we just love this image because it's a lovely old image of piano tuner, but just sort of capture that sort of time distance. This guy's got a cigarette in his hands. We never realized that until we sort of used the image. And it was just great, So if we go to the next slide, when we talk about this sort of design DNA in the products, there are like key elements. Obviously, the brand itself is the #1 central element that we need to focus on and centralize in the product, and that's something that we want to honor and put front and center. One of the things, the way we've treated it, we've left it alone. We've not sort of put a model name under it. We've given it the sort of honor and the space it requires in the product, and centrally placed it. And it's treated in this beautiful champagne. You'll see that on champagne gold and all the products. We go to the next slide. And we just talked about this, but I think it's emblematic of our approach to the audio engineering as well as the mechanical engineering and the design all coming together to create this sense of symmetry. And as Joel was saying, it takes an extraordinary amount of effort to get that kind of symmetry in a product. You can imagine the trade-off between a mechanical engineer, designer, acoustic engineer. I mean, even the placement of a screw sometimes can affect the audio performance of these products. So all this has to be absolutely sort of gone to the next level of depth as we execute them. Go to the next slide. One of the things you see us emphasizing as we go forward is, this is such an iconic element of the history of Marantz that there's always a challenge in the digital age of do you move on from this? Do you change this? What we felt is we wanted to reinforce the feeling of the iconic porthole. And for us, this is as much an icon to us as I would say the watch face for Rolex or a Panerai. And so you'll see us emphasize that, centrally position it, and continue to use it both as a digital element and as a design feature and mechanical element going forward.
So what does that porthole indicate? What does that meter on? What does it show in the user?
That one there is an old classic one. We want to show the history. That's an old VU meter, but we actually want to be using our products will be the focal point of the interaction. So in the future, this will be, that's it, thank you. It will show Can you focus in on that at all? Show the where it's reading.
I unfortunately, it'd be difficult for me to do that. But that actually right now is showing my volume
don't do
and
that,
what
Phil.
source I'm actually playing.
Yeah,
so that's what's actually going on.
That'll
right
be
now.
a key interaction element going forward.
Yeah.
That'll have the key information that you'll need on there. The other thing you'll see that in the history, and we talk a lot in design of form follows function, and while this is very functional, I always draw the analogy to, the easiest way is cars. Like, a Volkswagen will get you from A to B just as well as a Bentley, but it'll give you a very different experience. So, one of the things we have in here is a very sort of rich use of materials and texture and lighting. And now lighting and interaction through light has always been part of the Marantz history. And that's something we wanted to sort of double down on in the experience. And you can see here the sort of complex interaction of light and form, which was something we want to give these a sort of breathing ambience and light to them in use. And I think Phil, as you can attest to, sat there with a scotch at night with just this on it. It seems to sort of fit the trait. Yeah. And I think also we took a lot of time tuning that LED light, so it has that sort of almost like a tube amp kind of warmth and glow to it as well. And you can see here this sort of sense of proportion line which Marantz products have always had, and I think that's something we want to attest to. There's always been this symmetrical break, very clean, understandable outlay of controls and features on the product. So we wanted to keep that there as well. And I think the other thing to add is the use of materials. We use high grade aluminum. We use aluminum in all the controls are weighted, and they have a really smooth action, a very precise action. That's something we want to get into the experience. As well as here, you see the porthole becoming the key area where the interaction happens. And we've reserved there's so much rich heritage to draw on with Marantz. We spent a lot of time in the museum in Shirakawa with all the old products. That some elements we have to decide where and how to use them. And Joel spoke, beautifully how we're reusing the model names. Also, the star motif is being used as the digital element now on the products rather than a physical element on the products. So look for more detail on that going forward with new languages. So I think that really covers the industrial design for now.
So quick question for you on that porthole. When you saw the star kind of icon on it, is that something that happens during power up? Do you see that graphic, or is that just yeah? Is that real, or is that just photo like a rendering?
Yes,
that's real.
That's real. Yeah, you've done this before. I can tell. Is that a mock-up or a real one? Yeah, that's a real.
Yes, it is. It does happen doing power up. And like I said, when he mentioned that warmth of it, it is nice to look at the glow that comes off of it, because this thing is sitting a lot of times front and center. There's a pride of ownership to having these products. I mean, the reason why we're in my room right now is I didn't want to disconnect this and put it on a shelf, because I am literally playing this thing right after we get done with this and enjoying my weekend. So it's beautiful to have.
Gene, I can add also there. So, and actually, Phil, if you do it, when you power on the two products together, they synchronize. So they both have the star at the same time, and the whole boot up process is fully synchronized across the two units. So
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I got to give
nice.
Simon a high five. So
I got to put you guys on the spot about one thing. Is there any way that all that LED backlighting can be changed to blue? Because blue is always like associated with high end, that's like the overend.
Simon, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, we did actually investigate that, and we do. In fact, I have a model behind me I can't show you that has the blue tuning in it. So we did have a sort of bipolar switch between the blue. We decided for reasons not to do that. One of the main reasons that we started to steer Marantz away from blue, and it's still in the heritage, we may use it again, is that the use of blue in consumer electronics has been really cheapened. Right? When we started using blue, I mean, I have an old printer, behind me with a blue LED. Blue LEDs used to be extremely expensive to use. And as they became more popular, the price of those dropped, and we almost see it sort of overused in every sort of cheap car hi-fi and everything. And it didn't seem synergist with the brand at this point. But it's something we may return to in the future.
All right, let me put back the slide presentation. Here we go.
I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Come on.
Yeah, I'd say the other thing we spend a lot of time on is the actual colors, the CMF on this, as we call it, color material finishes, is the paints and the materials and the anodization of that aluminum. there's a warmth to it. There's thousands of specs of different different blacks you can get to, and champagnes and things. So that was very carefully engineered. And you'll notice on the side of the box, there's no screws. The whole thing is clean done. Yeah.
And then also the remote. I mean, even the finish of the remote. This is a nice thing to hold. And I was just looking at this when I took it out of the box. The colors and everything else is it's just a beautiful thing to look at.
It's got heft to it as well, which is it's good weight in those. Gene, do you have the device there? Have you experienced it in person?
No, I don't have these. I come from the background in terms of 2-channel Marantz. I had the PM11S2 and the PM11S3. I love those. That's what really got me into vinyl, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when you talk about that section. But I was always skeptical about vinyl, and then I said, you know what? I got these incredible reference speakers. Everybody's talking about vinyl still. It's become kind of a posh thing. So I started buying some records, and I got the the TT15S1 turntable from Marantz. I love that thing, and since I got that set up, I have a guy that works for us named Xavier. He's the Dr. Analog, and he is obsessed with vinyl. And he came and spent 3 hours tuning and balancing that thing, and the experience is stunning if you get a good record. And the fact that the preamp section on the PM11S3, the phono section on that, which I measured, and I have measurements we could talk about later, was just stellar. I mean, it was just a great experience. So that sold me on kind of the Marantz 2-channel aspects of the brand.
Then you'll love this. Yeah, it's a great segue to Emmanuel.
Presentation. Yeah, can you go to the next slide? So I'm going to introduce you the product a little bit more in the detail and talk about the specification of the product. But before we dig into all those technical specification and everything, I just wanted to share that picture with you. So this is a picture of one of the listening room that we have in Japan. And actually the gentleman you see sitting in the chair there in front of you and staring at you a little bit is actually the Marantz Sound Master. So you saw from the new proposition that musical is at the center of the proposition, and before that it was because music matter. And this is what's important for us and always been important for the brand. That's how it started initially. That was the journey that Soul B Marantz was on. Initially it was not trying to do a business, it was just trying to find the perfect reproduction device for his own use. And when he developed that in his kitchen, he was really happy about that. And then his friend came and they asked him for a new unit or whatever. So it's always been about the passion of reproducing music, and that's why we always define it as the most musical sound. And everything we do, so of course we measure the product, and of course we take a lot of time, but we tune those products. And I really like this word there. So
I love that.
That's too funny. That's too funny. I'm sorry, Emmanuel. Please I'm sorry I interrupted you. But
that's okay. I was wondering what was happening there. That's great.
I have to ask, what is the deal with that braided cable? Man, that looks like that could run, the DeLorean from Back to the Future.
Yeah, so we just wanted to make sure that when we test and we listen to those products, you're not listening to any of, if you use cheap cable or whatever, you're not listening to any part of that you really have the purest distribution of the signal as possible. So don't ask me the brand of those cable, I don't know, but I know that they have pretty good equipment in that room to do that.
Zero gauge cable there.
Yeah, I know, it's massive. It's massive. So, and basically what's important there on that picture is that no matter which product, which price point we're doing, no product will be released until the Sound Master validate the product. And you're probably familiar, if you know about Marantz, that we're using what we call the HM, Hyper Dynamic Amplifier Module, which is our own way of creating and replacing the small IC chipset, where we can almost hand select each of the parts we're using on those boards. And that's our way to tune the sound. So I just wanted to share that because I think this is something that it did exist from the start. And those Sound Master, they spend countless hours just making sure that those products sound right. And there's a long tradition around that. And Okada-san that you see on the picture have been trained more or less 10 years by the previous Sawada-san Sound Master. And this is how the tradition is keeping. So yes, measurement is important, but I would say also the emotion of the music reproduction is all.
Yeah, I was just
I
going to add something else. Picture, Emmanuel, like people pick up on the old computer in the corner, and so they, so they think it's a really old photograph. That's there because it just runs one kind of software. It doesn't exist in any other.
Wow.
Picture like runs on floppies, and it's the best software, and it's the only way to use it. So
yeah, it is not a picture for 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It is a picture that is really, really recent. So
yeah,
okay. So let's go to a little bit more of the specification of the product there. So basically, talking about the Model 30, so it is a pure analog amplifier. So, but if you look at it, it's basically almost a two-in-one, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on the next slide. So you have a preamplifier and an amplifier in the same box, and they really treat as two separate parts of the product. Which is really, really important with independent power supply and really, really short signal path in between them. We will talk also a little bit about the phono, so you touch base on that. So we have a phono input MC and MM on that product, and we actually went back to the drawing board of the phono. It is actually interesting to see that the interest for phono and NLP reproduction is growing. So, and looking and studying that whole market again and looking into that, we realized that there's been a lot of progress that happened in the last 10 to 15 years there. There's a lot of new type of cartridge. So we had that impedance selection there because we realized that not all the cartridge that you can buy today work the same way. So in order to have the best possible reproduction, we had that. So and I will show you that to you in a bit more detail. So we also have a DC coupled volume stage. So we're not using any capacitor there or whatever. So also to preserve the purity of the signal there. We have a lot of power in that amplifier. So we have 2x 100 watt into 8 ohm or 2x 200 watt into 4 ohm. And yeah, I touched base on that about the no matter all the number, whatever, there is that aspect of, that Marantz sound that people are referring to, and which is really what the Marantz Sound Master are there to keep. Even if, of course, you want to make sure that an amplifier is bringing as minimum coloration as possible, you really want to hear the speaker. But there's still, I would say, an opening, a 3D sound that Marantz is really well known for, that we want to preserve and make sure it is there. So you really have that really, really wide stage where you're listening to. So if we look at the next slide, so there's basically here, I put a picture so you can look at what's inside the product. And if you remember that before, sorry about that, I was mentioning about two products in one, and you see it there. So what you have there on the right side, it is the preamplifier module. And as I mentioned before, so we're using what we call the HDAM. So there is no IC chipset there. Everything is made out of a discrete passive component that we can tune and select the way we want. And the power supply, the linear power supply you see below the product, the picture there, which is using a toroidal transformer, is actually the power supply for the preamp section, just to make it clear. In the top part in the center, you have the two power amplifier module. If you look at that, you will see that they directly connect to the speaker terminal. This ensures really a super short signal path. There is no cable running in the amplifier between the amplifier module and the preamp that can, mixing high current and low current could be dangerous sometimes for noise level and all of that. So by this design, having the power amp directly connect to the speaker terminal, you really avoid that. There is no better way of doing it. And next to that, you have the SMPS power supply actually this power supply is for the power amp. On the side also there on the right, you see a picture of that dedicated phono stage, which is actually located below the preamp board, so you don't see it on the picture. And because here you're even into lower, I would say, voltage than the preamp, we also shield that phono stage by itself and place it under the preamp. So a lot of attention to those details just to ensure the best and the most musical sound possible.
So basically you're dealing, this is basically separates in one box is what you're
Yes,
saying.
it is. It is basically a two-in-one in one box, right? Can you go to the next slide, Phil? So this is a picture of the back of the amplifier. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a 100% analog amplifier, so there is no digital input there. There's a pre-out and there's also a direct in. So if you want to use that amplifier with, let's say, an AV8805 from Marantz as an AVR and use that just as a power amplifier, you can do that using that power amp in. So you're bypassing completely the preamp section in that case. And you see also that the Phono outputs.
Nice. So I just want to do one quick comment on the back panel of that product, and it says power consumption 150 watts. I'm actually going to do a separate video on this. That's not a max power rating. Just so
No,
I know people keep asking that on YouTube, and I'm going to do a whole video on this because I kind of went back and forth with Dan and engineers, and now I know how this is rated. It's rated at a much lower power, and then the amplifier efficiencies actually consume more power as a result, and they come up with this number. But we'll talk about that separate. Just I don't want anyone to say, hey, this is a 200 watt amplifier and it says 150 on the back panel.
Yes. And the other thing you can see there, and that I forgot to mention earlier, is that product is made in Japan. So we have our own factory in Shirakawa that Simon mentioned about before. So this is where we're manufacturing that product, which is also a great way when you're in the tuning process and in the engineering process of a product, that if you want to test and different component or whatever, it makes the whole thing much easier at the end.
So quick question for you on the PM11S3 that I used to have, there was a button on the front where you could turn off the power amp section and just use it as a preamp. Does this one have that feature too? Or are the speaker terminals always active even if you use it as a preamp?
So it's always active even if you use it as a preamp.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have that feature. Here also I want to make a quick stop. So I touched on that earlier or whatever. So we kind of look back into the market and all the different cartridges which are available there. And we realize the fact that with new generation cartridges which are available now, we realize that generally the impedance of those new cartridges is much higher than the older generation ones. So basically I would say older generation, and don't take that wrong in that way, I would say that have been designed and engineered long time ago, I have a pretty low impedance, and the more modern one, the more new one like Clear Audio is using, is of a much higher impedance. Our own cartridge, which is the DR103, which is one of the products we've been manufacturing for the longest there, is also in kind of the mid impedance section with 100 ohm. So we wanted to make sure that no matter the type of cartridge you're using, you really get back that whole dynamic you may have, because if you have a high impedance cartridge and you put that as a low impedance input, then you're going to lose some of that dynamic there in the whole process. So by having that, I would say, impedance selection, you can really get the maximum out of your own cartridge. And I mentioned that before, we really went back to the drawing board for that phono input, and we look at it probably that was a section that we were carrying on for a long time and use it product after product, which was a pretty amazing phono input. But that new generation one was really going back to that drawing board and really looking into the way it was almost done 20 or 30 years ago and trying to bring that back into a modern product. So it is I really encourage people that, because there's been a lot of passion and engineering that went into that phono stage.
So two quick questions about the phono. One is, if you have a Marantz TT15S1, which as far as I know is the only turntable that Marantz is producing right now, what setting would you use for this amplifier? And then are you guys planning on releasing more turntables through the Marantz brand now that you have a product like this?
So the answer for the TT15S1 is to go on the high, because we're using a Clear Audio cartridge on that product, so it's basically there. And I will defer probably to Joel to answer to the second part of the question.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of interest in this part of the industry. Turntables, we definitely have a history, so I think it's something we're absolutely looking at in the years to come.
Great.
So here I just also wanted to touch base on, so we're having a switching amplifier in the model, but we have been spending a lot of time working on that mode And it's actually not a new module for us. It is actually the same one that is used, for example, in the PM10, which is our super high-end premium amplifier at the moment, which is a fully balanced amplifier, and use 4 of those amplifier modules. Here in the Model 30, you only have 2 of them. But what was important for us was also with typical switching amplifier, generally what happened is your frequency response is really changing according to the impedance of the speaker you're connecting in the back of the amplifier. And it had coloration to the sound, and you're not really listening to the speaker any longer, but you're more listening to the amplifier. And we wanted to make sure that we avoid that. So one of the things we did, and engineering did in the whole process of working on that module, was to introduce that feedback loop with a low pass filter that really control that frequency response, no matter the type of the speaker you're using. And the real benefit of that at the end is, and you see that from that graph, it's you have a very, very identical frequency response, no matter the impedance of those speakers, and you're really listening to the speaker. So if you connect different type of speaker, you really hear the difference between speaker A and speaker B, because there is no coloration from the amplifier side. And it is really, really interesting. So if you really, it's a nice way sometimes to rediscover your speaker.
Yeah, so basically, guys, this is a load invariant amplifier, which is the very best in Class D these days. And I'm glad to see Marantz is embracing this now in these products, because I've been testing a lot of Class D amplifiers, the good ones, and this is one of the good modules, the Hypex one. And basically, the difference between this module that's in here versus the P10 is the P10 has a bridge tied load, so it uses 2 per channel, which gives you double the power. So the interesting thing I was telling you guys before is this Model 30 was like for $2,500 is giving you the same power output that you were getting from a Marantz PM11S3 that was only about $4,500 just a few years ago. So in actuality, this is quite a value product. You're getting an amplifier that's more efficient because it's Class D. It's load invariant. So in many ways, the amplifier section's better than what we saw in the PM11S3, and it's cheaper.
Yeah, that's correct. So I would say, yeah, it is a lot of value for the product, and I think there's been also, a lot of progress that have been made around, I would say, digital amplification. So I know that sometimes people may have a reaction of saying, "Oh, this is digital amplification," but as you mentioned, Gene, there's been so much progress into Class D amplification that is now at a level which is almost impossible to notice any difference between a Class D amplification, the way we do it, or what you're going to have in an AB class. It is something that Marantz also has. If you go back to the history and the discussion, it was the same thing in the discussion with Sorby Marantz initially using tube amplifier, and people asking him, "Hey, why do you still use tube amplifier and not going to the transistor?" And he always answered the same thing of saying, "Hey, I don't believe transistor is at the level to be used into, I would say, electronic for amplification today." And when the transistors were ready and prime time for being high quality, then Marantz moved to the transistor. And kind of the same thing with the Class D. Initially, Class D was used mainly for the cost reason, and it was not really having that hi-fi quality that people are looking for. But no, Class D, if you go for the higher model one and the good one, that's really at the level that it needs premium hi-fi. So it is why we're embracing those solutions now.
Awesome. I like that. So I have to put you guys on the spot now that you're embracing Class D on 2 of your products, 2 of your high-end products. Are we looking in the future for having a multi-channel receiver, like a newer receiver model that's going to have Class D? I mean, it just makes sense when you're dealing with 11 or 13 channels, and you could cook an egg on some of these receivers because they idle so hot. The problem with Class AB is at low power, you're only about 15 to 17% efficient when you're at low power. So by having Class D, you're always, in the 80s to 90% efficiency, even at low power. It just makes sense.
I can take that one if you want. So the answer is along the way. Certainly, I would say the prime of the Class D solution we're using, it is a really expensive solution at the moment. So if we put that directly into our AVR at the moment, it may go to a price point where people will say, "Wow, I don't get it any longer." But yes, it will have a lot of benefit. So as we continue to progress around, I would say, the design and what we can Class D, Pretty sure it will happen at some time.
Or maybe it makes sense for like a separate amplifier, a dedicated 7-channel or 11-channel amplifier. That would be really killer. Some product ideas, guys.
That's probably where you're going to see it first, if you ask me.
Yeah,
but I'm not the AVR guy. I'm just the hi-fi mini system guy.
Understood.
Emmanuel, how many models, amplifier models that utilize this? You have it's this model. Is it the KI and the PM?
The KI Ruby and the Model 30.
Okay.
And there is actually also a model in Europe, which is called the PM12, which is also available in Japan, which is also using.
Is that different than the P10?
The PM10?
Yeah, the PM10.
The PM10 is the only one that uses 4 modules, which is fully balanced and use 2 per channel.
Yeah, that's
amazing. All the other ones have the same architecture.
Gotcha. Okay,
is there any other question around the amplifier before we move on the SACD player?
We could hit some of these questions towards the end, I guess, and just go on. Yeah, let's go to the so that ends the presentation on the integrated amp. Let's because we're going to break this video up for easy digestibility. So